If you are a non-technical entrepreneur and you're building and launching a no-code app that you plan to turn into a reliable business, we don't want you winging it as you go. That's the last thing we want you to do. Instead, we want you to have a plan and a process to follow as you build and launch your app so that you can do so strategically. A lot of people who are stepping into the no-code space, they just kind of learn as they go. And when that happens, once they get to the other side of building their app, maybe even trying to launch their app, more often than not, they end up having to start all over again because they didn't have any sort of plan or process to follow in the first place that would get them from that starting line over to the finish line correctly and in a way that actually allows them to scale. So today we're going to talk about a plan and a process that you can put in place, and more specifically, the three core concepts that we include in our own process that we take our own private clients through. And so we're going to go through these core components so that you can implement them into your app development and launch plan and carry them over into actually scaling your business. So first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and no technical background required. And make sure you stick around until the end of this, because we're also going to talk about a free workshop that you can join in on that's going to take you through some of these steps in a little bit more in depth with your own app. Okay, so first, there are three things, again, that I want you to really understand, and I'm going to share my screen here so that we can go through these. Oh, when I look at our entire process that we take our clients through, I can break it down into building the right things at the right time, and let me move my face here, and in the right order. Now, there is a lot of strategy that goes into building and launching your app and growing your app-based business, but we can break it all down at the very root to these three things. We want to make sure you're doing the right things in the right time and in the right order, at the right time and in the right order. So, what does that mean? Well, this applies to the strategy involved in building and launching your app and the technical components that you are going to be putting in place. So first, when we're talking about the right things, again, number one, we're talking about the strategy. And this is specific to your unique app because you have a very specific target market. You have a very specific set of features and functionality. You have a very specific expertise. You have specific knowledge of the industry that you're building the app for. You have to use that in ways that are specific to you, in ways that apply to your app. So you can't just throw a blanket strategy across every single app. You have to look at this at how you need to launch your app. You know, what stage are you at? Are you in the stage where you can jump into validating your product? Do you need to validate your idea first? Do you need to, what features do you need to include in your product validation? All of these different things. We have more videos on that, so I'm not going to go through each of those things here, but you have to make sure essentially that you just have the right roadmap in place so that you are focusing on all of the right things that are particular to your app and your market. And within all that strategy, within all that overarching roadmap, you have to focus on the right technical components. And this applies to lots of different pieces of your app. The way in which you structure your database, for example, the foundation of your app, how you piece together all of your different workflows, your logic, all of these things they really matter. It matters that you focus on the right things. And the reason is because a lot of people, they kind of focus on everything, because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. So when you're stepping into this space, maybe you've never done this before, you don't have experience, you kind of just try to do everything that might work. Well, we want you to do the things that will work and that will work for you. And so when we're talking about things like performance, for example, the performance of your app, well, what specific features does your app need? What specific data structure does your app need? What specific workflows are going to go into the back end of your app? All of those things affect the performance of your app. But depending on what you need, they're going to affect it differently. And so you have to focus on the right things for your app. And then aside from, all of those technical pieces that go in kind of behind the scenes, you also have to focus on the right features. And this honestly kind of goes, it kind of falls into both of these categories. You can look at this from an overarching strategy standpoint. You can look at it from a technical standpoint, but you have to make sure that you're actually focusing on the right features. Again, for your specific solution, your app, for your specific target market, that play to your specific strengths, to the gaps that you are filling in your market. Okay, so you have to focus on the right things. This is one of the most core components of the full plan or process that you could be following to build your app. Now, we want to take that a step further because, okay, let's say you are focusing on all of the right things. And in other words, you're not wasting focus, you're not wasting energy, you're not wasting time or resources. Well, now you have to make sure that you are focusing on these things at the right time, because different parts of your strategy will come into play in different phases of your development and of your launch. Different technical components will come into play, again, at different times within your development. And different features are going to come into play at different phases in your development and launch. So we don't want you taking the all at once approach. The all at once approach is when you come in and, again, you just kind of focus on everything. You do everything that you could possibly need to do because, again, you don't know what you don't know. And so when you come into this and you're kind of maybe winging it, which is understandable. If this is a new space for you, that's understandable. But when you take this all at once approach, even if you're doing all of the right things, are you doing them at the right time? Because that's just as important. So if you implement different parts of your strategy at the wrong time, it's not going to be effective. You can kind of think of it like a ladder where you have to climb up the first rung before you can possibly reach the second and the next. Because otherwise, if you try to start from the bottom and jump all the way up to the top, what are you going to be doing? Well, you're just going to be left jumping again and again and again, coming back down again and again and again, and eventually you're probably going to get tired of it and stop. We don't want you doing that. That's the all at once approach. So you have to focus on these things at the right time. Now, we're going to carry this over into the next phase and dig a little bit deeper into that. You also have to make sure you're doing all the right things in the right order. Now, this is a little bit different than at the right time. It can kind of seem like one and the same, but it's not. So different parts, actually, let me back up. Let's look at it this way. So let's say you have a handful of different stages or phases that you're going to be going through in order to launch your app and your business and then grow the business. So first, you start with your idea. So you have your idea, you have that experience with your industry or your market, and you then go over to validate that idea. Now, depending, and this is going to go back to this strategy over here, but depending on your idea, depending on how how much experience you have in your industry, what your connection is to your market, what the app is for, what problem it solves. Depending on all of these things, that will dictate how this idea validation process goes, which will then dictate how you move into the next stage. But let's say you have this validation for your app. So let's say that you have an idea for an app, and this is a solution that's going to solve a problem in an industry that you have a lot of experience in. Maybe you work in this industry, maybe you have a business in this industry, and so you're coming into this with a lot of pre-validation for your app, because maybe you yourself would also be a user for the app. Okay, so the next thing that you need to do, that you would do, is create the first version of your app, because now you need to move into product validation. So you create the first version of your app, and this is the app that you really want to move directly into the scaling phase of your business itself. So this kind of comes back to building the right things at the right time. But what you don't want to do is get to this version 1 stage over here, not build out the app by thinking about the right things at the right time, not build an app that's going to be scalable, that's going to perform well, that's going to stand the pressure under your user base and all of that. Let's say you don't do that well, then you're going to have to start over. You're going to have to backtrack. And we see a lot of people having to do this because they didn't do the right things at the right time. So now that we're in the right order, you can see how, or in this section here talking about the right order, you can kind of see how we bring the previous 2 components of this overall plan into place. Okay, so now let's say you have this version 1. Well, now you need to move into the testing phase with your alpha testing, your beta testing. You need to start bringing some initial waves of users on board so you can start getting feedback. And then ultimately you want to come into the stage where you're really scaling the business. So again, when a lot of entrepreneurs who take this all at once approach, what they're trying to do without really knowing it is they're trying to go from here on the far left side all the way over to the far right side. And ultimately, that leads to them not doing the right things in the right order, or not doing the right things in the right time in the right order, I should say. So it all kind of comes together. Every single piece of this builds on top of the previous. And one of the things that we really, really emphasize with our clients is to be laser focused on the right things. Make sure that you are laser focused on them at the right time. So we start out with a full picture of all the right things. So you can just call this your roadmap. It's really important that you have one of these. So we get all the right things outlined. We identify all the right things up front. And then let me move this up a little bit. And once we have all of those things outlined, well, then we kind of break them up into different stages, okay? So we make sure that we're focusing on all of these things at the right time. And again, we keep in mind the overall correct order that these things need to happen in. So from a strategic standpoint, from a technical standpoint, you can't build certain things in your app before you build other things in your app, for example, or they don't work. That comes straight back to this kind of ladder approach, right? We have to climb up the first rung in order to get to the second. You can't jump all the way to the top. So when we create this roadmap and we outline these stages, we make sure everything is happening in the right order, right? According to this kind of overarching plan right here. What happens is we're narrowing down the focus so much And it's so effective. If you have read the book, The One Thing, or Essentialism, or even the 80-20 principle, you might have heard this before, but imagine if you stand outside in the sun. Let's say you stand outside for, maybe an hour, okay? You might get a sunburn, right? You might get a sunburn if you stand outside for an hour. Now, let's say you, instead of standing outside in the sun, you take a magnifying glass and you hold it under the sun, right? And you shine it directly down on a specific point on the ground. What's going to happen? Well, you're going to start a fire, right? That's my fire there. When you focus the right energy, you can accomplish so much. When you look at this this picture on the screen here that I've drawn, it's a really good example of this, right? The sun's heat is, let's just say it's really hot, right? But if you stand outside, you might get a sunburn. But if you focus that energy, if you focus it through, one specific magnifying glass at one specific point, you can literally start a fire. You can accomplish so much if you have the right roadmap, if you do everything at the right time and in the right order, if you follow a process and a plan. So ultimately, what I really want you to take away from this is that I don't want you to be winging it as you are going through the process of building and launching your app and scaling your app-based business even. Just because you might be new to this space, or just because you've never successfully built and launched an app before, that doesn't mean that you can't come into this with a process and with a plan. It doesn't mean that you have to get to the other end when you're planning to launch and realize that you have to rebuild everything. It doesn't mean that you have to build your full app and then realize that you didn't do the right things in the right order and at the right time, and therefore the app doesn't perform. Maybe you try to do one core function and it takes so long that you can't imagine any users ever staying on board. We don't want that to happen, but those are the things that we see happening with entrepreneurs who don't follow a plan and a process. They have a hard time building their app, much less scaling it. They have a hard time even knowing what should be a part of that initial development. They have a hard time creating an app that truly works. And I don't just mean that works on a really basic level, but I mean that works for them and for their needs and for their users' needs. Does it work in a business setting, for example? Is it gonna help them maybe run their business? Or is it gonna help their users maybe run their own businesses, right? Does it work for you and your specific needs and your users' specific needs? All of these things have to be accounted for when you're going through the development and you're going through the launch. You have to do the right things at the right time and in the right order. Now, if you want to take this way further and actually start putting these pieces into place with your app, we have a free 75-minute workshop, and it's going to take you step by step through the initial process of making sure that you are laying the right foundation for your app and for your overarching strategy. And it'll help you make sure, again, that you're doing the right things at the right time and in the right order so that you can be moving forward with your app correctly and avoid all of those consequences down the road that we really don't want for you. The rebuilding, the wasted time, the wasted effort, the wasted money, and all of that. We don't want that for you. So to get started with this training right now, just head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. You can dive into the training right away, get started with your app, or if you've already started with your app, go through it anyways. Make sure that you're doing the right things at the right time and in the right order so that you can save yourself a lot of headache down the road. So again, that's coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. All right, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.